As a die-hard fan of Midnight Club LA, I'm ashamed to admit I've never played Midnight Club 3. After releasing a video on Midnight Club LA, I received a lot of comments about making a video on Midnight Club 3, so here it is. A retrospective that feels especially interesting to me because I have no good memories, associations, or nostalgia to cloud my judgment on this game. I'll just be raw dogging a 21-year-old game that released on hardware which is 3 generations old with my rose-tinted glasses nowhere to be seen. Other than positive ratings, I was also fairly unaware of exactly how this game was even received upon release, so this will be purely based on how much enjoyment I get from this old relic as a big Need for Speed Underground 2 fan. For all of you Midnight Club 3 fans, I do hope I don't have to upset you. As I do with all the games I play, my main focus will be enjoyment factor. I think fundamentally, that's what games are for, so it's silly not to. I could spend all day talking about the technical aspects of a game that make it good, but if they don't make it enjoyable, then can we really argue that it's good? With that in mind, Midnight Club 3 will obviously be given a get out of jail free card for its aging graphics, purely from a fidelity standpoint at least. While I believe good and pretty graphics can add to the enjoyment factor of a game, they're in no way essential, and games can look pleasing without necessarily having the high fidelity of modern games. So although this game's graphics may have been good from a technical perspective upon release in 2005, it's silly to compare them to modern day titles in that particular area. With that being said, let's get into the review. Starting where we left off, the presentation. There's no getting around the fact this game has aged. However, the game still looks good stylistically, in the same way surrealist art can look good without looking realistic. Midnight Club 3 may have aged, but it's far from an ugly game, even by today's standards. The devs made so many clear, deliberate stylistic choices that immediately highlighted one of the problems of modern realistic graphics. While developers are expected to make their graphics look up to realism standards, it can put them in a bit of a box from a stylistic standpoint. Lots of games end up looking quite similar or realistic. This game looks like none other, and it's very distinguishable from its competitors, in some bad ways, but mostly good. I'm a huge fan of the motion blur effect that happens to the streetlights when the camera moves. It feels very period correct and adds to the sense of speed. Speaking of sense of speed, it's hugely exaggerated here. Using NOS feels like that bad CGI scene from Fast and Furious, but all in the right ways. With that being said, it does always feel like you're going fast, even right at the beginning in the slower cars. But at the same time, the very arcade-based handling model makes 170 miles an hour feel like nothing. Pair that with the fact that every car in this game accelerates to its top speed comically quickly, and the actual sense of speed is quite hard to put into words that actually make any meaningful sense at all. This R32 Golf I had was doing sub 2 seconds to 60 with minor modifications within minutes of starting the game, and acceleration doesn't really seem to drop off. It's almost completely linear until you're nearing the top speed of the car. It feels a little strange, but it does make everything feel quite hectic and exciting, even very early on in your first unmodified car. So does the colour palette, which, despite initially appearing a little muted and dull, is actually very alive and full of colour. I'm a big fan of how this game looks, but it isn't all sunshine and rainbows, the most obvious flaw being those car models. Some of them are just straight up terrible, particularly in the early game where the cars obviously didn't see as much of the budget. This is an area where I'm sorry to the Midnight Club 3 fans, but Need for Speed Underground did it much better. Although, to cut them some slack, Rockstar had their work cut out for them. Underground 2 had 30 cars, whereas just the base Midnight Club 3 game had more than 70. The car sounds are also not really up to Underground standards. Most cars just sound like vacuum cleaners and there's not much else more that can be said about them. As someone who's a bit of a stickler for bad car sounds and models, I thought I would hate this, but honestly it doesn't feel like you're missing out on all that much. The cars still feel great to drive and are just a lot of fun in general, and I forgot about it pretty quickly. Moving on to the handling, and there's not much to say here other than the handling model is excellent. It's extremely arcade-like, but suits the map and game layout so well. It feels intuitive, predictable, but most importantly, easy to pick up and learn, which is needed in a game where you spend most of your time doing north of 170 miles an hour into oncoming traffic. While comparing it to modern Simcade games like Horizon 6's handling model, it does feel quite one-dimensional. Forza has always excelled at pulling off forgiving arcade-style oversteer and understeer, but it doesn't really feel like the game is missing anything in the handling model department either. My only complaint would be that some cars seem to feel a little bit overly sensitive and twitchy at times, but you get used to this quite quick. There's no need for this section to be overly long as the handling model doesn't have all that much depth, but I think it's designed in a way that its simplicity complements the game well. With that being said, it does make most of the cars feel quite similar to one another. They do all have slightly differing characteristics like general responsiveness and body roll, but that's about as far as it goes. The difference in how drivetrain setups behave is pretty minimal. You do well to even work out if the car you're driving is rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive if you didn't already know. This does all sound quite negative, and while on the surface it's something the game is lacking, again, in practice, I didn't really care. The game needs a certain handling model to flow. Adding masses of understeer and complexity to the handling model could make it a pretty miserable experience. So I'd say less is more in the case of Midnight Club 3. But one of the absolute most important aspects of retro games is the atmosphere and vibe. Old games without a good vibe and atmosphere tend to show their age much more. It's one of the biggest reasons we revisit them. It's a fundamental pillar that keeps these games worth playing years and years later. This was the part of the review I was most excited for, mainly because, as I said at the start, I've never played this game properly before. I have no nostalgia to add to the vibe or fond memories which can massively cloud my judgment on these old games, so this felt like a bit of an experiment. I was actually a little bit nervous to see what I thought of this game as a retro game fan. I'm a firm believer that the enjoyment that we get out of revisiting some of these older games go much further than just nostalgia and fond memories. They're proof that realistic graphics, constant drips of dopamine and 100GB file sizes are not essential for a good game. So if this game disappointed me, despite it being such a favourable game amongst fans, it may make me rethink my perspective on this a little bit. I'm pleased to say it didn't at all. This game put a big, stupid smile on my face as soon as I entered the first race. And that's a feeling a lot of modern racing games have failed to emulate. And if we compare the level of detail in modern racing games next to Midnight Club 3, you can be sure it's not fancy graphics pulling the weight. This is pure, perfectly crafted atmosphere and fun doing all the heavy lifting. The atmosphere in games can be very hard to articulate into words that will actually translate into anything all that meaningful for someone who hasn't played the game. So for those of you that haven't, my advice would be please do. To those of you that have, you will likely have a better understanding of what I'm getting at. Anyone familiar with the atmosphere of Need for Speed Underground 2 can also relate to this. The chaotic, anarchist, neon-lit midnight vibe, they're both actually very similar in many respects. But Midnight Club has a much clearer focus on hip-hop culture. This is heavily reflected in the music, but clearest in the car modifications. Need for Speed does also have plenty of 2000s hip-hop-esque content, spinners, hydraulics and Snoop Dogg, but it leans heavily into the modified performance car scene more than the gaudy spinners, luxury cars and hip-hop scene. While both games are littered with hip-hop, metal and drum and bass, Midnight Club has a much clearer focus on early 2000s rap and hip-hop culture than anything else. Midnight Club feels a little more like it wants you to drive a big heavy barge on spinners, and Need for Speed wants you to go and tune your race car for the street on the dyno. Both games cross over heavily, but this is just a general consensus. As someone who's a big fan of new metal and cars modified for the purpose of performance, it was hard to begin with not to lean in the direction of Need for Speed Underground 2. But given enough time with Midnight Club 3, I honestly couldn't say one is better than the other. They're just two relatively similar concepts presented in drastically different but brilliant ways. I don't want this review to become an Underground 2 versus Midnight Club 3 video, but Underground 2 does make for a very good reference and comparison point, and I'd say considering how much love Underground 2 gets, that's a huge compliment to Midnight Club 3. This may be a bit of an oversimplified, arbitrary way of comparing the two, but Underground 2 feels like a more rich experience purely through the lens of a car enthusiast. You get the better models, more tuning options and better sounds. Whereas Midnight Club 3 feels like a more rich and certainly more polished experience as a game. Midnight Club 3 is so well designed as just a game, something designed to be fun, that even as a die-hard car enthusiast, it quickly masks its shortcomings in the car models and sounds department anyway. I think as long as you go into Midnight Club 3 expecting a good game and not a game that makes you feel like you're actually driving your dream car, you will not be disappointed. Midnight Club 3 far exceeded my expectations, and for anyone who has yet to play it, I urge you to do so. You won't regret it.